Hello everyone, hope we're all doing well. Welcome back to our League of Legends, of course, LEC breakdown for week number 8. We have 1 week left, and this past weekend was quite possibly one of my favorite weekends of League to watch, especially for the LEC, also the LCS. I'll cover that probably next video as well as our weekly breakdown continues. All of our timestamps will be down below if you guys want to bounce around to different subjects out there. Before we get into our players of the week out there, I quickly want to discuss our current standings out there, and it is going to be pretty crazy. 4 teams so far solidifying their playoff spots as of 10 victories. G2, Origin, Splyce, and shortly followed by Vitality as well, all wrapped up those 10 wins and their playoff spots. 2 spots remain for the remaining 4 teams because XL and Rogue remain at the bottom, although they will still be an upset team for the remaining contenders, that of course being Fnatic, Schalke, Misfits, and SK Gaming. Even more interestingly, when you look at the strength of schedule, all of those 4 teams fighting for those last 2 playoff spots, they face at least one opponent who is tied for second or higher in the standings. Fnatic has, of course, your best chance currently at 9 wins, probably only need 1 win, might not need any wins. They actually face off against G2 and Splyce, and you look at teams like SK, probably the easiest of those schedules. They play Rogue, but they also have to play Vitality and likely need both those wins. So this last weekend is going to be absolutely insane. I cannot wait to see it. And one quick prediction, you guys can leave your predictions down below. I'm going to say Fnatic and SK are our teams. SK, of course, the lowest of the chances of our remaining teams. They certainly need probably those 2 wins and a stroke of luck with other teams losing. But either way, I am super excited as we enter into our last week. It's going to be insane to cover. But of course, covering our past weekend, let's hop into players of the week. And there was an astounding list this past weekend. Alphari going to be my first one, strictly for his actual game against Rogue. Now, I will say one thing, the entire team looking very spectacular this past weekend. But Alphari's first time being my player of the week, or at least one of them. I think just for his game against Rogue, he actually, if you guys did see this, I'll try and show you some clips, evading 5 to 6 ganks. Now,
he's used his ulti, he's committing. There's not a creep wave here, they're fully going to commit for the dive. They're going to try to kill the Croc, he's knocked back into the middle team, he's going to dash through, he gets knocked away by the Tristana, insult the injury, the Galio now coming in, Colby getting him a little bit more help. EQ, desperate to get this kill. Alphari is still alive, are you kidding me? Send a 5th one, Rogue, it's just not going to happen.
You got to give a shout out to Mithy there, the ultimate coming in clutch, keeping the top laner alive. I think that's 5 for 5 that Alphari has now survived, even in a 1 versus 4.
Now, this could be a poor showcase from Rogue's side. We wouldn't be very surprised. Either way, though, earned my respect, earned the caster's respect. If you guys did watch that game live, it was pretty spectacular. And I will say, amongst his entire team, they all looked tremendous this past weekend. Cold doing his things, Nuke Duck, his one-shot combos continue, and Patrick so consistent throughout this split. The entire team is looking very good. Alphari, though, shined very bright this past weekend, and I think he deserved this spot. Alongside him, another player I have not really given much credit to this past split because he has not earned it yet, but this weekend certainly doing so. I think his game against Misfits was one of the best games I've ever seen him play, that being Bwipo. The aggressive playstyle is now back. It still worries me against Excel. He actually got caught out doing some pretty aggressive things, but Fnatic in general, especially with Bwipo, proving they can get first bloods. He certainly did against Misfits. They snowballed that lead. They proved to me, we'll talk about them later on, they do not only need to feed Reckless, they have many stars now on this team on the rise, Bwipo being one of them. Yes, he still makes me very nervous, but this past weekend, especially against Misfits, he showcased his true talent. Not only has solo kills, a sheer zoning power of Aatrox, and also does some great evades mid-game, he all in all really impressed me during that matchup, and that's why, of course, I did pick him. But also, very lastly, I think maybe shining most brightly of all these players I did select would have to be Kobbe. This dude stood out to me so much this past weekend. 8-2 in Vayne, 12-1 on Sivir, who arguably won in the late game against G2. Once again, though, like many of these teams these players do play for, all in all, the entire roster over there looking absolutely insane. Very strong in terms of Splyce, as well as Origin, as well as Fnatic this past weekend, but these individual players certainly stood out to me. Now, speaking of players out there, but also the teams they do play for, teams of the week has to be next. Origin has to be my first one. They looked so incredibly dominant when they played SK, even so much in the lead and so confident enough to fake a Baron to actually push that split push to actually win the game earlier than expected. So I thought it was a great maneuver themselves. All in all, Origin now winning 9 of their last 11 games have certainly impressed me, I'm sure, with many of you guys out there. I think Fnatic, like I said previously, has to be mentioned. I thought it was actually last weekend, or I guess we could go back 2 weekends. It's really Reckless. They proved to us they had to feed Reckless, and they proved the vice versa. I thought it was Broxa last weekend. His early game utilization has continued into this past weekend as well. And then Bwipo coming out forward, it really shows you the showcase of this team once they finally crack that little curse of themselves. They can feed anyone early. They've done a great job early to actually snowball those leads, and all in all, the synergy has finally come to fruition. I'm really trusting this team now, and if they don't make playoffs, I think it'd be a pretty big disappointment and a pretty big surprise at this point. But also, very lastly, Splyce, of course, locking in playoffs this past weekend and doing so in pretty darn dominant fashion. In both these victories, actually some very similar crossovers between SK and their victory over G2 as well. They took both these games quite late, as we know Splyce to be that late game team, but on top of that, they tend to usually survive early to mid game, you know, try and extend it as far out as possible. They not only survived, but they actually thrived in the early to mid game, dominating G2, I think doing a pretty good job against SK, and forcing both teams to make engages, or themselves forcing engages ever in their favor. It was against SK, Norscarin, time and time again, catching hooks and catching flays, and most of their engages were very advantageous, not only player-wise, but on top of that, location-wise, their actual spacing out of the team itself, and choosing the right engages against SK meant most times it was 5v4s, and against G2, seeing a bit of a turn of that, it was actually for once Splyce being the very dominant, very aggressive team. It seemed to catch G2 off time and time again, and they pushed that lead. They did not stall like they needed to. They stalled because they could, but they kept on forcing engages and forcing objectives as well. Splyce did one thing so keenly against G2. Of course, getting a double Inferno very early meant they could actually force it. They forced G2 to take the third Inferno while they take the Baron. Later on, a double Inferno after their Baron. They also eventually get the Elder as well, and by that time, Kabi's 10-0 on Sivir, double Inferno plus I think it was a 3-stack Elder. You're not going to stop that. They force objectives to get other objectives. They played that game, in my opinion, so cleanly against a threat like G2, you can never take for granted. So some great games from Splyce. I think overall the best team I saw this past week, and I guess bouncing off that as well, plays of the week, Kabe possibly turning this game around and many other games with it. A triple kill at Baron, although Caps made it look very shocking and very close and possibly very one-sided. Kabe takes it back.
Chachi there, Caps has the flank position, he's gone back, needs to teleport in soon because Caps just gonna jump in. Surprise, says Caps. That's 2 down, a third to follow, and it's all on Kabe. He takes out one, Chachi's on the break. Can Kabe get the boomerangs in? Can he turn it around for his team? The only man who's been on this team the whole time, it's Kabe, and it's a party for Splyce because they ripped through G2. Holy hell!
And I guess we can take it one kill at a time, one step up. It's going to be Underwhelming against Misfits. Been pretty much to rest here with his play. Not a triple kill, but a quadra kill.
And Abadagi's got the paddle star available. Odo and Memento are nearby.
They're not pulling off.
All right, Abadagi goes in. Look at the damage on the hard sum. He's backing away. There's a million red stacks on the Baron, but the red can't be popped. Memento and Odo, the combo for a triple kill. Baron is still available to be secured. Here comes Upset for one. Misfits, they're done. They're dead in the water.
And thank you.
And yes, it's got to be a play of the week because it's a penta kill. You know, one step up, triple, quadra, now penta. Yes, it's going to be Upset himself. Unfortunately enough, though, it's the only thing they got pretty much the entire game for Schalke.
Schalke, Abadaji trying to do a little bit more as Expect gets forced away. They picked up the Rift Herald. Miasma stops the Hex Splash going out, but the jump back in. Expect once again lands the hook. So much damage coming out of Upset, but he opens up his back once again. Abadaji still doing work here as Upset, just cleaning up the fight. Somehow got the triple, somehow got the penta. The main man for Schalke stands up and is counting.
And the segment this week I'm certainly not going to enjoy. I think Underwhelming Players has to go to, I can't even make eye contact with the camera. It has to go to probably sOAZ. I think this guy had, unfortunately enough, one of the most demotivating weekends I have seen of a player thus far. The first time I've actually mentioned him on the show as an Underwhelming player. Unfortunately, one of those losses also being too Fnatic. It was just it was even tough to actually make the words to talk about this. Actually, losing a 1v1 caught out by Bwipo, you know, that's just kind of the most coincidental, ironic situation you possibly could be in, and it seemed like after that pretty much a mental not, I couldn't even say a breakdown, but it seemed to be so. Caught out time and time again in that game alone, actually in both games caught out time and time again, and in fact at one point in time the fact was released, he is now at least the second highest in terms of isolated deaths and second highest in terms of overall deaths. Certainly not something you want to be known for this split. I think all in all, he's had his poor weeks here and there, but I thought he's had, you know, some games where he'd come back a little bit, not necessarily enough to actually call him the Underwhelming Player of the Week. This weekend, though, he was by far the most underwhelming player. But speaking of that and bouncing off that as well, underwhelming teams out there, I think you got to look towards Misfits and Schalke. Now, I will give Schalke one thing. I really do think that after that win against Misfits this past weekend, a lot of us probably put Misfits out of our mind as a playoff contender, even though they do have a shot, in technically, statistically speaking, a better shot than SK Gaming. What they gave us after the past 10 games, let's keep in mind, Schalke did win this game. They break a 7-game losing streak. They do so, though, in beating the Misfits, who have lost 7 of their last 10. But I think both these teams suffer in a bit similar fashion in terms of early game struggles, but then also a little bit of a different struggle, because I don't think Schalke really have made it late game too much, but so too Misfits, right? Misfits, of those 7 losses, a few of them come at record ending times in terms of speed, but same with Schalke as well, having severe missteps. I really do think both these teams, once they do fall behind, you have a series of oversteps and overengages, try and claw back at that lead, and we've seen time and time again they get caught out in doing so. sOAZ in a bit different fashion, he does so very isolated. Then we have Abadaga, who kind of just steps out in team fights, and all of a sudden it's a 4v5, not in their favor. So I think both these teams certainly struggling. In terms of this, though, again, Schalke breaking their losing streak against Misfits, put that where you want it. On top of that, though, Underwhelming having a great Kennen game, just to put in perspective for all of you on how underwhelming as a team Misfits has been. In that matchup, Underwhelming himself did more damage than the entire lineup. Yeah. So when I call out sOAZ, you really should be calling out the entire roster, and that is why I will choose Fnatic and SK. Now again, SK likely have to win both their matchups this weekend against Rogue and against Vitality. I would say Rogue is a gimme, but again, nothing really guaranteed as of right now in this race so far. And I think Fnatic, you know, even could possibly not win both their matchups and still go through. Only have to win one of those, but they play arguably right now 2 of your 3 best teams in the league in G2 and Splyce. Either way, that's my breakdown. You guys can leave your comments down below as to what you thought this past weekend. Despite the bad news for some teams out there, other teams out there having explosive weekends, some great highlight plays, and it was amazing to watch. As always, my name is Jake. Hope you guys all enjoy. Next time I see you, we will solidify our 6 playoff teams, and I cannot wait to break that down. And the entire split, what we saw, it's been pretty crazy. But until next time, take care.